Hey, all you literary legends and luminaries. I'm Julie, and welcome to an animal-centric episode of Booksmart. Today's book is a memoir, Never Leave the Dogs Behind, by Brianna Madia. If you can't tell, I love animals. I've introduced Baby before on an earlier episode of Booksmart, and this little guy here is Shakespeare, although he looks more like a gremlin, the kind you feed after midnight when Baby slobbers on him. A memoir called Never Leave the Dogs Behind had my name written all over it. First, I must remind my watchers that I'm not into social media. Were it not for my Booksmart, I would have no online existence. I only watch the TikTok videos my husband shows me, and I must admit that some are incredibly funny. I use the internet for research, not for entertainment. I could survive easily on a flip phone, although I would have to print off my coupons and my rewards. So I have no idea who Brianna Madia was, nor did I care all that much. Except when I started reading her book, it felt like she expected me to know who she was, which was irritating in its narcissistic way. But overall, I did like the book. Apparently, Never Leave the Dogs Behind is sort of the sequel to her first book, Nowhere for Very Long. So a reader like me who has no idea who Madia is just gets dropped into the story. You have to figure out the context as you go, which isn't necessarily a horrible thing. It's just frustrating when the author expects you to know the backstory, and if you don't, well, that's your problem. The story begins in the Abajo Mountains, which Madia fails to mention exactly where that is in the desert. The book jacket says she lives in Utah, so I assumed correctly that that's where she was. Right away, we are introduced to her four furry guys and gals, Dagwood, Bucket, Birdie, and Banjo. They make their rounds every morning, and on this particular morning, Dagwood is naughty and takes too long on his rounds. Let me read you a background paragraph in the first chapter that kind of puts all of this together and puts it in context. I was as torn between guilt and anger about the accident as I was about everything in my life that would follow. If Neil hadn't run Dagwood over, then there would have been no story to tell on Instagram, a story that would thrust me, by my own ignorant doing, into a limelight that would change my entire life and ultimately ruin it. But as time went on, I knew I had to stop saying that, because my life was not ruined by the accident. It was shattered, but not ruined. Altered, but not ruined. Devastated, but not ruined. The accident led to the exposure on Instagram, which led to continuing to work as an influencer, which led to the ability to keep running around in the desert with the dog I saved from the accident. The accident I should have told the truth about sooner. And that untruth and that limelight ultimately led to my divorce. I suppose there must have been cracks in the marriage somewhere, but they split wide open after that. My divorce was the reason I moved to Moab, the reason I found that plot of desert so positively perfect. I still wonder if I dreamt it. I dug myself a grave to keep my dog out of his, and what happened in the wake of that, on the surface at least, was that my life became everything I had hoped it might. I just hadn't learned how to be happy about that yet, because being happy felt inconsiderate. Being happy felt outright wrong. Being happy felt like I wasn't still so deeply, deeply sorry about how so much of it came to be. So here's the thing. Readers will never get the full story of the accident. I don't know if Madia covered that in her first book or not, but it was infuriating not to understand what exactly had happened to Dagwood, considering this is supposed to be about the dogs. The second chapter is entitled The Girl Who Hit Her Dog, but there's not really much about dogs in it, just about some stupid social media stuff regarding her husband. And this is my biggest complaint with the book. The dogs should have been central to every single chapter. Yeah, they're there, but I would say only about 50% of the book is really dog-centric. The last kind of memoir I would ever want to read is about some social media influencer's life, especially because the only reason I'm reading this book in the first place is because of her social media. But then she complains about all of its horribleness and how she was so attacked on social media over the dog accident that I still don't understand. Madia develops her separation with her husband Neil and how they share a couple of the dogs. This should have been a chapter all by itself about co-parenting dogs and dog visitation schedules, but she only brings it up a couple of times and never develops it. Granted, it didn't last long, for Neil moved away and never saw the dogs anymore. I must read you this heartbreaking part about Dagwood and what happens to him through all of this separation. I understand that a clean slate is often the key to recovery for many addicts, but that last part hurt the most. That last part was impossible to explain. For months, Dagwood ran after every white pickup truck he saw rumbling past on dirt roads. I'd call out to him each time, watching his urgent trot slow to a standstill. He'd turn back to face me. "I'm sorry, buddy," I'd cry. He did it for almost 6 months before he realized it wasn't ever going to be Neil behind the wheel. I couldn't decide which broke my heart more, when he started doing it or when he finally stopped. Oh, I could just see that poor little dog running after white trucks. When divorces happen, people don't focus so much on the pets, but they are affected by it just like human children are. Madia addresses these pets are like children moments well in her memoir. The bulk of Madia's story centers around the land she bought in Utah and various adventures on the land, the challenges they face since originally they live inside Bertha, a huge orange van, and then she buys a trailer from the 70s to live in. She doesn't have a toilet either. And you can see, babies kind of fall asleep on me, but she's huge. So I don't know how Madia does it with 4 good-sized dogs in such a small space. Baby is too large for my house, and my house isn't too tiny. Madia is just like one of the dogs. They sleep together, pretty much go to the bathroom together, drive into town together. All 4 dogs roam aimlessly, and they all come back. I don't know how she does it without worrying that she'll lose one. This little guy here, I won't even let out in my backyard yet because I'm afraid he'll get stuck under the deck or escape under the fence. I envy Madia's comfort and camaraderie with her dogs. Despite being very different from Madia, I love my house too much. I love being clean and having clean floors and clean countertops. And I can't even see myself as a contestant on Survivor, no matter how much I love that show. My love of animals is very much like hers. There's this beautiful passage about her grandmother and horseshoe crabs I must read to you because it's so sweet. And it kind of shows you that this element was always there forever, from the start. My grandmother's real name was Nancy, but she was Nanny to us. I remember running through our house as a child, followed closely by the eyes of silky black cats on the spiral staircase or perched atop the piano. There were always at least 4 or 5 of them that only she could tell apart. I hung on her every word as she regaled me with stories of her childhood best friend, a white farmhouse duck named Huey. The 2 of us would walk behind the beach together, hand in hand, stopping to gently right any horseshoe crabs who had found themselves upside down, unable to make it back out with the tide. Their alien-like bodies looked so helpless, legs frantically kicking out into nothingness. I'd call out to them as they slid back through the sand into the water. "Goodbye. Be careful next time." It's just so preciously sweet. Dog people, and don't forget about cat people too, get it. And horse people and hamster people and bunny people and bird people, we all get it. And Madia puts into words eloquent passages about her dogs and nature and how we as humans operate in the world with Mother Nature. I'm going to read you one more passage about the overall interaction with Mother Nature and how we humans deal with it. People's fear of the natural world was startling. They believed that certain places needed conquering, that the weather had a vendetta somehow, and wild animals were just monsters waiting behind every corner. Everything was out to get them, but nothing could be further from the truth. Perhaps what truly frightens people about nature is how little they actually matter to the whole operation out there, how it spins on without them no matter what. The fear of being meaningless is more frightening than death. Well stated. Madia writes relatively short chapters about building a shed and a deck, a scary trip to the beach, and driving to Mexico with no itinerary. Whenever possible, she does things on her own, by herself, independently, just a girl and her dogs, although she reaches out to former one-night stands for help and then just ditches them when she's gotten the help that she needed, which felt a bit odd to me. She brings up a lot of different themes, her depression, addiction. It felt a bit too haphazard for me at times. When it focused on the dogs, it was a very refreshing story, and I really loved reading about people's love for their pets. And Madia's style of writing was fluid and with some profound passages, those eloquent epiphanies where you couldn't write it any better yourself, that she put into beautiful language a complex, intricate idea that just all came together. Sometimes she has fragments that don't always make sense. I'm all for fragments, but at times I had to reread them to assess their meaning, which was a bit irritating. My biggest gripe goes back to not having the full story, enough background information about Dagwood and how Madia ends up where her story begins. I could have done without all the social media junk in the book, which had little to do with the dogs minus Dagwood's accident. However, I'm going to make a blanket judgment about it all. People who sit and post nasty stuff online about other people, isn't there something better you can be doing with your time? I don't get it. So much wasted energy on hate and negativity that only drains yourself and will not really give you the satisfaction you desire. Because remember, negative publicity is better than no publicity. Apparently what started all the hate was that Madia cannot account for the $100,000 from the GoFundMe account for Dagwood's surgery. And then she didn't admit that her husband at the time was driving the car, none of which is ever really developed nor fully explained in Never Leave the Dogs Behind. And therein is my irritation with Never Leave the Dogs Behind. It's more about social media and influencers than it is about the dogs, and that really disappointed me. The dogs should have always been the stars of the show, but they just kind of felt like a means to another book, that they were always co-starring rather than in the lead role. And here's my little star of the show today who's kind of taken a back seat. I would still recommend it if you are an animal lover, for there are some beautiful passages in the book. It's a short book, so it won't take you too much time to read. Plus, a book will give you a nice diversion from all that screen time that apparently has taken over our lives. Baby and Shakespeare say thanks for watching. As always, my goal at Booksmart is to get a little bit smarter, one book at a time.